Good afternoon. I'm Farron Dozier. I'm a retired Army Sergeant First Class, spent 24 years in the military, and I'm a hidden pioneer. Today I want to just present with you a conversation that is very important to not just myself, but parts of the community. And then also I want to share more about my work with the hidden pioneers and how I see that there's maybe just a conversation missing that we can help our youth alter their experiences around their choice of employment or job or college. So in the military, I experienced what they call sickle cell trait exertion with rhabdomyolysis. I was doing the Army physical fitness test, my 17th year. I did the push-ups, sit-ups, and I was out doing the 2-mile run. On that last lap, we're training to sprint. So I heard the instructor, 15:45, 15:46. So I'm like, okay, let me get this run over with. So I take off to sprint. And I did feel like this electrical charge come over my body, but I didn't think anything of it. Across the finish line, 16 minutes, put my hands on my head to get air in my lungs, all the things we're trained to do. But all of a sudden, my peripheral got dark, and I started feeling nauseous. So I kneeled down, laid on my back, closed my eyes. I didn't pass out, but when I opened my eyes, everything was spinning like 1,000,000 miles an hour. The medics came and got me, rushed me to the hospital. Doctor takes me in the back, puts an IV in my arm. Said, "You ever had kidney problems?" "No." "Well, you do now." And then he walks out. I'm like, what is going on? So he comes back in and says, "You know what? You're probably just dehydrated, heat stroke. I'm gonna give you another IV, go back to the barracks, get some rest, you should be fine." I go back to the barracks, I wake up mid-afternoon, everything is worse. Everything's still spinning, I'm throwing up, almost crapped on myself, like in a bad state. I'll go back to sleep. I know it's 16:30 because my classmates come back in the barracks. They rush me back to the hospital. The night doctor does some more tests, and he sees that my creatinine kinase levels are 12,000 and rising. And so there's a condition called rhabdomyolysis. It's a skeletal muscular disorder. And so what happens is the myoglobin in the muscles start to break down, leak into the bloodstream. It reaches the kidneys. The kidneys start to fail because of the toxins. And now I'm dealing with renal failure. At the night when I got there, my kidneys were like 50% each. So the doctor just didn't know what to do. Put me on IVs for 4 days. It flushed out my kidneys. My CK creatinine kinase levels dropped down to about 600. I was able to finally walk. I had severe muscle damage, joint damage, dealing with vertigo, still kind of nauseated. They sent me back home from the school to visit my regular doctor. I do that, and the doctor says, "Well, you know what? Maybe you just can't exercise anymore." Every time I got on the treadmill, it felt like I just got off a roller coaster ride at Magic Mountain. So I'm like, okay, cool. There's other events that we can do in the military. I could do the bicycle or the walk. And so I turned that paperwork into the military doctors, and they say, "No, you can't do any more exercises. You can't carry a weapon until we figure out what happened to you." So by this time, now I'm dealing with not just physical pain, but I'm dealing with my mental pain, because now I'm like, okay, is my career over? And then they tell me you have to get a medical board to find out if you can stay in the service. That sent me to a spiral into depression and anxiety, because now my career is coming to an end. I happened to be on the base one time leaving a mental health appointment, and the officer that I served with during the war in 04, 05, I hadn't seen him in 5 years. He says, "How you been?" I'm like, "You don't want to know." He's like, "No, tell me." I'm like, "Man, I could barely walk. My bones hurt, my joints hurt. I'm going to these mental health appointments." And he's like, "You know what? Something like that happened to me where my muscles locked up, but I have sickle cell trait. So I have to drink extra water, take these vitamins." I'm like, why does that sound familiar? And then I remember in 1999, I did my second physical in the military, and the Air Force Base found my trait. And they called me in a panic, like, "You need to come back to the clinic." I'm like, okay. So I go back to the clinic to see my doctor. He says, "Do you know I have sickle cell trait?" I'm like, "No." He says, "Okay, we just want to let you know." But he gave me no brochure, no information, no flyer, no nothing. So I'm like, okay. I have a cousin with sickle cell disease. He's like, "No, it's not the disease. You're just a carrier. So make sure you don't mate with another person with sickle cell trait." I'm like, okay, I have 3 daughters. I'm done having kids. So, okay, that's in one ear, out the other. So when he brought up that conversation, I remember that physical. I went and got a copy of it. And sure enough, it was a positive sickle cell trait test. Took that to my rheumatologist because I'm dealing with arthritis. And now this is 2010. That was the collapse in 2006. 2010, so 4 years later, almost 5 years later, I hear this conversation about sickle cell trait again, and sure enough, I get another test done, positive sickle cell trait test done, and then they discover that in the military and in athletes, they have been collapsing and dying from sickle cell trait and exertion with rhabdo. And so I became an advocate for that. I was medically retired in 2013, and I became an advocate for that. So I now speak and travel in churches, high schools, elementary schools, military bases to share about sickle cell trait. Most people think it's a black gene. We are number one because it actually combats malaria. Most people are not aware that it fights malaria. So in those parts of the country, when people got malaria, they would die. So what the body did is it created this defective gene. So when you got malaria, that red blood cell would die off faster, and then it gave an opportunity to survive malaria. Outside of that conversation, we're starting to discover that there are health factors and risk factors, again, connected to exercising and overexertion. I met Bill, I don't know how many years now, 7, 8 years now. And so I partnered with him to go into the schools to bring this education to the students, because not just, again, African Americans, but you could be Caucasian, Mediterranean, European, Asian descent. You have to know your bloodline. So it's no longer just about what color your skin is. You have to know where your ancestors are from. But more importantly, in my transition out of the service, yes, I became an advocate, but I also had to end up dealing with my mental health, right? And that part, I got some personal development courses, and I was able to start to unravel what was going on with my mental health and why did I feel like my life was over when I got out of the military. Part of that was my identity was trapped into my camouflage, into my rank. So if you understand identity crisis, outside of that uniform, I didn't know who Farron was. I was lost. So that had my mind say life is over. So now you talk about living to the future of uncertainty and anxiety, or you talk about living in the past in depression. I was dealing with depression in the past because I was mad at myself. I had to forgive myself because I was mad that I sprinted that day. If I didn't sprint that day, I could have stayed in the military longer. I could have got my next rank. I could have had all this stuff accomplished. The future of uncertainty was so far in the future that I know what my life was going to turn out. Was I going to lose my house, lose my family? Was I going to take my life? But my point is, when I was able to do this personal development courses and understand how my brain was functioning, right? And I had made up some decisions about my parents at a very young age, that my dad didn't love me and my mom abandoned me because I was a latchkey kid, what they call 1978. You had to walk home by yourself and have this key to get in the apartment. What we don't understand is we lose our children in that middle school to junior high school because sometimes there's a low smooth stress that happens because the child is now transitioning from a smaller class to a bigger class, and now the identity is, who am I, right? And so now we have to figure out, how do we help children discover that early on, because you can put them in front of any kind of career, but if they're going home saying to themselves, well, that sounds good for him, but I'm not good enough, like, where does that come from? And so there are conversations we can have to help, I say, alter the mindset of our children, to empower them to find that self-reliance, because life is not over. But there are things that happen to us that we make up these stories that are not true. And those first core ones for me was my parents. I had that my dad didn't love me and my mom abandoned me. And then when I went to my peers, you know how that goes when you go to your peers. That's all trial and error, right? But what happens is sometimes we make up decisions about ourselves, right? That out of that conversation of my dad doesn't love me, you either try to prove yourself or try to prove your love or whatever happens. But I tell you, at 40 years old, I realized my mom didn't abandon me. I was an 8-year-old kid. I had no idea about time. And I had to walk home from school with this key. So I had to become responsible. I even picked a job in the military as a supply sergeant to prove that I was responsible. But that was going on in the background. I didn't know that at the time. So what I'm saying is there's a conversation we can have with our youth, with our parents, so that our children can start to deal with some of those internal dialogues, right? There's 3 things I want to say. Sometimes for myself, I'll put myself in this. I discovered that at a very young age, there was something wrong. There was something wrong here, right? At a very young age, and that created a little burden on me. And then I discovered that I don't belong. For whatever reason, I don't belong. And then I'm on my own. So the abandonment part came from my mom with the latchkey kid about I'm on my own and I had to become responsible. But it's not a bad thing. She trusted me with the key to the apartment at 8 years old, right? But in my mind as a child, it was 90 minutes. It felt like 20 hours, but it was 90 minutes. But when I figured it was 90 minutes, I was 50 years old. At 50 years old, I realized that my mom never abandoned me, that she actually trusted me, and that when I looked and see what was going on in 1978, what was on TV, man, Good Times, All in the Family, Sanford and Son, that stuff came on at 4 or 5 o'clock. I was in the house by 3. But the story that I was living in from all those many years was not true. But in my mind, it was true. So can you imagine growing up in an environment where you criticize your parents and not really connected to them because you think that they didn't have the life for me that I thought I should have, but they really did the best that they could? When you transform that view of your parents, I became free at 50 years old. And then I became responsible for my own life. But then I saw the damages that I had done to relationships, right? Because of trying to survive and trying to keep myself safe. So my point is, there are conversations that we want to have with our youth so that they can become free and self-reliant from their environment. There's a level of exclusion and inclusion that's an emotional. It's not just the things that we do about exclusion, but there's also an emotional piece that comes with that. And if we don't deal with that emotional, silent emotional, I don't like to call it trauma, but like a low mood stress, we can actually have a conversation and deal with that so that child becomes free from that. And now they feel empowered to take on life. And if you don't want to go to college, if you want to get a degree or a certificate, you have that choice. And a lot of times children feel like they're forced to, because as parents, we have our concerns for our children. We want them to turn out. My parents just wanted me to turn out as a child, but they didn't really know because they had me as a child. They were 19 and 20 years old. So I'm 51 now and still trying to figure out what life is. So I can imagine, my parents having a child in such a young age, and then I looked at how they grew up and what was going on when they were born and what was going on when my grandparents were born, post-slavery. So you could see how that generation had passed on ways to survive life, and then you have a child and you want that child to develop and grow. But we have concerns for our children. But we forget as parents is that our children grow up with concerns on their own life. And now how do we put our concerns aside and worry about what that child is worrying about, not what we're worried about? Because that's that child's life, that's not our life. So I had to then go back and heal my relationship with my 3 daughters because I had treated them how my parents treated me. And you see how the cycle kept going on. But now I have a grandson, and now that I'm educated and I'm aware of that, we get to break that cycle, and he will have the skills and the knowledge to listen and then make his own choices. And I believe that if we have this part of us as a core conversation with our youth, then the jobs that we introduce them to, they will look at an opportunity for them to be included by either dialogue skills or by their merit, not because of a race or a color that society has built up what inclusion looks like. And the military does inclusion by objectification so well because it teaches us to transform that person into a terrorist, right? So when we objectify one another, now I'm no longer connected to you as a person, you're a other. And then that allows me to talk to you or treat you in the other. And the military does it where we can transform that person into a terrorist, and then you kill that terrorist. So I'm not killing a person, I'm killing a terrorist. But then one day that brain's gonna remember, that was a human being. I didn't kill a terrorist. So these are the things that if we start to develop and teach this at our younger ages, at our 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old ages, and we listen to them, we can teach them how to be included, not just by what you do, but with your language, with your conversation, and then with your merit, right? And the objectification, it hurts us. Even as we talk about race and black and white, again, I'm objectifying you. If you look at sports, you put a Clipper jersey on and a Laker jersey on, they will talk to each other and they will talk down to each other and sometimes kill one another because of a team jersey. That's the power of objectification. We need it because it teaches our children how to survive. But when that conversation gets corrupted or out of context, it also can hurt us as a society of people. So I just want to say thank you, Bill, for the opportunity to share, my awareness, but how I want to contribute to the Hidden Pioneers to help our next generation. I don't want to say change their future, but at least alter their future, so they have an opportunity to be included in society. Because we already are. We're already born with access to everything that we have. It's just how do we figure out what we want, and having the parents understand that, yes, you're concerned for your child and you want your child to turn out, and we're going to help them discover themselves so that they can take that education and utilize it for something. It could be their purpose, their passion, their gift. My sickle cell trait became my purpose. I was born with that inherited gene, and that same gene that I thought was going to kill me, it allows me to find my voice. And imagine a child develops that they find something that they care about in society, and they use that education to use and find their voice and empower them in that. Not to get a job, to survive life, right? And so I'm very grateful to be a part of this and to share, and we're here to do the work. And more importantly, we're here to be the work, to share our examples, to share our testimonies, so that the children can learn from us and who they get to be. It's not just what you do in life, it's also who you get to be. It takes confidence, it takes courage, it takes a boldness, it takes a way of being to be able to take on a job. You have to be able to take a risk. You can't take a risk if you don't feel you're good enough. Then you have that battle in your mind. But imagine if you be the confidence, you be courageous, you be whatever that is that empowers you first, then your activities will go in alignment with who you're being, and then you can be honest with the results that you want to produce. Not everybody wants to have a lot of money. Some people just want to have fame. Some people just want cars. They want a house for their family. And being able to have the children understand that, what are the results you want to produce in life? It's not always about fame and fortune. Sometimes it's about selfless service and community. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? There are jobs, as we were talking about earlier, you can get a trade job that pays more than a doctor. But if you're only given that sports and military is your only options, no way. You don't have to be the athlete catching the pass on the courts. There are so many jobs connected to football, to racing, to baseball. But we have to help the students discover that for themselves, not tell them. And this last piece of it is, for me, there are some things I discovered about myself and for people. One of the main things that is hard for people is that to honor our word. To honor our word to ourselves and to other people. It's challenging. They call it integrity. But it's challenging to honor your word to yourself and to other people. The second one is keeping an empowering context. And that's what we're trying to, not what we're trying to, but we're being here is how do we keep that person to have an empowering context through their circumstances, through their struggles in life, through incidences. How do we keep that person to be empowered in that context? We can. We can. But it takes away of who you get to be, not just what you do in life. So again, Bill, thank you for your time, man. If you want information about me, my organization is WDConsect.org. That's WDConsect.org. I'm also a broadcaster and a filmmaker, things like that. So I have a lot of community outreach stuff I do connected to that. And that's at FarronD.com. And that's FarronD.com.